Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Now our first guest is a whistleblower. He's a great man. He's also a blogger for Huffington Post and an associate fellow with the Institute for Policy Studies. He blew the whistle on waterboarding. The CIA using waterboarding against Al-Qaeda prisoners. He was a case officer with the CIA and a senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He ended up going to prison for that. A terrible thing, for telling the truth. We'll tweet links to where you can find out more about him. But of course, you know all about him anyway. Let's welcome back to the programme, John Kiriakou. John, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well, thanks. And you?
John, I'm great. And thanks for taking the time out to do this. Listen, it couldn't be more timely having you on today. What do you make of what the British Prime Minister has said, namely, we might not share certain information with the United States if we believe that it might lead to the use of torture, on the back of what Trump said yesterday? What are your thoughts on that, John?
I was very happy to hear the Prime Minister take a stand. You know, this is something really that the international community has to do to teach the United States government a lesson, that the issue is not whether torture works. The issue is whether it's moral, ethical, and legal, and the answer is a resounding no. Donald Trump is not going to listen to his own advisors. He's not going to listen to the American people. Maybe he'll listen to foreign leaders.
Now, a part of me is tempted to say people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, John. And the record of the United Kingdom, in terms of extraordinary rendition flights out to exotic islands in the South Pacific, our record here is not great either, right?
Right. And I think that, frankly, that your Parliament has done a great job delineating exactly what it is that the UK did in support of our so-called war on terror.
What have you made of what's happened in the last couple of weeks, John? Just before the inauguration, we had this extraordinary speech by Donald Trump where he compared the intelligence agencies in the United States to Nazis. Then the day after he was inaugurated, he turned up to Virginia, made peace with the CIA, and then blamed the media for making a mountain out of a molehill, when in fact Trump himself said the CIA were behaving like Nazis. What's going on there? How do you read that?
Well, there are several issues that spring to mind here. First of all, this is bad. If you are a CIA officer and the president-elect of the United States, now the president of the United States, is comparing you to a Nazi, things are bad. I can't imagine it getting much worse than that. In fact, I'll tell you, my wife is also a former senior CIA officer. She was traveling overseas when this story unfolded. And she called me one night and she said, "Are you seeing this news?" I said that I was. And she said, "Do the American people understand how bad this is for everybody, for the CIA, for the country, for the president to be doing something like this? This is unprecedented in American history. For the president of the United States to so directly and bluntly attack his own intelligence service." And then, as you point out, he went to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, the day after his inauguration, and at least pretended to go through the motions of making peace. The truth is, and we know this from CBS News here in the States now, that most of the people who attended that speech were bussed in with Trump and were Trump campaign workers. They were not CIA officers. And secondly, Trump insulted the CIA by giving his speech in front of the CIA's Wall of Honor. The Wall of Honor is a wall of stars, with each star commemorating a CIA officer who was killed in the line of duty. So he treated this visit as a campaign stump speech and then trampled on what we consider to be hallowed ground, frankly, at the CIA, just to talk about himself and how he had been wronged by the press. It was untoward.
Now, what I found extraordinary about this was British television, John, were interviewing former CIA heavyweights, former directors and former senior analysts. And they were saying things like they were disgusted that they were being turned away or that they would be turned away by Trump when they presented evidence to him. And what was really extraordinary about this was they were saying things like, well, we go to a president and we tell him we've had a good look at all of this intelligence and this is our best guess. And basically they were saying, John, the president and ergo the country should believe us no matter what. Right. Now this is extraordinary stuff, and a lot of people wouldn't have been aware of this because I suppose most Americans and most British people, they would have imagined that when the United States takes a preemptive strike against a man in Bagra or inside Syria or somewhere, most Americans and British people would think, well, that's based on 100% solid evidence that somebody is going to do something bad. This was an extraordinary thing, right?
What's extraordinary is when you have that kind of intelligence. 99% of the time, it is really nothing more than a best guess. Intelligence is a guessing game. And what you have to hope for is that you have enough little bits of intelligence from enough different sources that allow you to then form a conclusion. But it's very, very rare to be 100% certain of anything in the world of intelligence.
John, how much today, and you know, I meant what I said at the very beginning. I've known about you a long time, and I'm always amazed when people have the courage to tell the truth about things that are wrong, even when it's going to put them in a very difficult position. And of course, it cost you 2 years of your freedom, which must have been a nightmare. I think we talked about that last year when you were on it.
Yes,
I can't even imagine.
Yes, we did.
Now tell me this, right? How much of the CIA these days, how much is it about genuinely trying to protect people in the United States, and how much of it is about supporting geopolitically, militarily and financially groups like Islamic State and other so-called terrorist groups to keep, you know, Syria unstable and to keep that chaos never ending? Could you quantify that?
That's a great question. And it's a question that is honestly very difficult to answer, and I'll tell you why. I think that, by and large, most CIA officers want nothing more than to serve the country, to provide best kind of intelligence they can possibly come up with, to protect Americans, to defeat terrorism, et cetera, et cetera. 99% of them. But at the senior-most levels of the CIA, you have a group of people who really are, at least in their own minds, geopolitical players. And so they have competing loyalties. Now, one loyalty, of course, is to the American people. You want to serve the American people. You want to keep them safe. But another one is, frankly, to the corporate structure. You know, the CIA leadership is going to retire at some point, and they're going to be young enough that they'll start a second career. And almost every single one of them will start that second career in an intelligence contractor, as a member of the board of directors, maybe as the CEO. We have CIA officers who have become the CEOs of Blackwater subsidiaries, oil companies, defense contractors, you name it. So they're also looking out for themselves and their role in that military-industrial complex. You know, a lot of people inside the CIA have gotten rich since the September 11th attacks. A former supervisor told me one time, stick around for another 10 years and you're going to be a millionaire too. There are a lot of millionaires walking around the CIA. Well, my God, I didn't join the CIA to become a millionaire. I could have gone into banking like anybody else, but I wanted to serve my country and do the right thing. Well, a lot of people don't join the CIA just to serve their country. They do it also to get rich and to become a part of that corporate military-industrial structure.
John Kiriakou is on the line. We've got John for another 10 minutes or thereabouts. Thanks for coming back on, John. This is great stuff.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It's an honour, mate. It's great to have you on. Listen, you know that former French foreign ministers and former MI5 agents, and this isn't new news, this is, you know, it's known, have said that, you know, things were started in Syria in 2008, 2009 to manipulate what probably was a genuine feeling of dissent there from people who wanted things to progress quicker, the transition to democracy quicker there in Syria. But it's blatant, John. It seems to us that it's blatant anyway. Our intelligence agencies here, MI5, along with the CIA, it's got to be said, along with Mossad, they're effectively responsible for what we're seeing in Syria. And most of our listeners, and we've a broad listenership right across Europe and the UK, they believe that. Is this generally accepted now amongst them, former analysts and former caseworkers like yourself? It's obvious that what's happened in Syria has been manipulated by darker forces.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. I'm going to disagree with you in part. This may sound crazy to some of your listeners, but I think that Mossad is not involved in this.
Why?
The reason, well, because for the Israelis subscribe to Realpolitik, and the Israelis, for the Israelis, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And the Israelis know that they can deal with Bashar al-Assad. They know that they cannot deal with ISIS. And so I think the Israelis have largely stayed out of this because they take a longer view in the region than the U.S. or the U.K. Now, the U.S. really has bungled this from the very beginning. Yes, Bashar al-Assad's a bad guy. Yes, he's a murderous dictator. But this isn't a perfect world. You can't just decide, okay, you're going to engage in regime change and keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best that a lover of democracy and human rights is going to finally take power in Syria. That's not the way things work, especially in the Middle East. You have to choose a side and be careful of the side you choose. In 2008, when the uprising began in Syria and elsewhere around the region, the United States made a very quick and I think not well thought out political decision to back opposition groups. Well, surprise, a lot of these opposition groups are tied to other groups like Al-Qaeda. So here you had American taxpayers' money going to support a group like the Al-Nusra Front, which is connected to Al-Qaeda and is fighting other opposition groups fighting against Assad. This is a recipe for civil war, which is exactly what happened. And another thing that the United States missed that made the situation so much worse is the Russians, and before Russia, the Soviet Union, had a long and historic relationship with the Syrian government. Like, did we not think that the Russians were going to come to Assad's aid? Of course they were going to come to Assad's aid. Syria is the closest ally that the Russians have in the Middle East. So this was just really bad policymaking on the part of Washington. A lot of people have lost their lives because of this policy.
And millions more have been moved. I'm just going to respectfully disagree with you, and I just want to make a couple of quick points. John Kiriakou, legendary whistleblower, courageous man, blew the whistle on CIA torture of Al-Qaeda prisoners, is on the line. Great to have him on. John, I'm one of the things I've studied a lot over the years, and I'm a history graduate, is Zionism. Uh-huh. And I mean, I know that Theodor Herzl, for example, the father of Zionism, you know, it's believed widely he is, they believe that the area of the Jewish state basically stretches famously from the Brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. And I believe they have a vested interest in partitioning Syria, and they have a vested interest in meddling in Syria. So I would respectfully put that to you, but I would also put to you, and it's great to have you on. It's great to have a different point of view because I get to have my say all the time. But I would say I would say this as well. Look, Assad is an ophthalmologist, and he came to power because his brother died. Up until the so-called rising in Syria, the United Nations had labelled him as basically a hero. He had reached all his millennial goals, and he definitely wanted to. He was a reluctant president. He definitely wanted to transition to democracy. And I'm going to respectfully say, John, I've not seen, and I'm honest, I'm not one of these independent media idiots, who picks a side. I've seen no evidence whatsoever presented by anybody that the Syrian government has deliberately targeted innocent civilians in their own country. I've seen no evidence. What I've seen is Western media demonization of him, a la military-industrial complex, to suit their own ends. I've seen a guy who's struggling to come to terms with the lunacy that's happened, the absolute chaos and the carnage that has taken place in his country, again brought about by external forces. That's what I would say.
Well, I've written about this extensively here in the States at a website called Reader Supported News, and I really don't disagree with you. I think that we made a mistake in the very beginning in our reaction to Assad by demonizing him. As you said in the Western press, pick up any major American newspaper and you'll see that he is indeed demonized, whether it's a newspaper on the left like the Washington Post or the New York Times, or on the right like the Wall Street Journal. Assad is indeed demonized. But I have maintained from the very beginning that the State Department, along with the Russians and the Turks and others in the region, should have been at the negotiating table with Assad since 2008, or even earlier than 2008. You're right. Assad never wanted to become the president of Syria. He never intended to become the president of Syria. But his father died and his brother was killed in a car accident. And the office was sort of thrust upon him. The reason why the State Department was so anti-Assad dates back to 2003, when Assad refused to provide overflight clearance for U.S. military and CIA flights over Syria on their way to bomb Iraq.
Right.
And the American government never forgave him for it.
And he was right, wasn't he? Because what we were doing in Iraq was based on a pack of lies, as you well knew.
He was right. That's right. The entire premise of the Iraq War was based on a lie. And so Assad was right in 2003. The United States was wrong.
I've just got one or two quick more questions for you in the 4 or 5 minutes we have left. Thanks again, John, for coming on.
Sure.
No, mate, when I say, a bit of a hero, you always have been. I love people who've got the courage to do what you did. No, I mean it, mate, I really do. What about Trump, John, saying that we're going to halt all the visas, we're going to stop people coming in, we're going to kind of demonise Muslims. Now, John, I know things are not black and white. I'm not an idiot. I know that whoever's right or wrong in the Middle East, I know that it has created bad people. I know there are Saudi Wahhabi-type jihadist nutcases who do want to do bad things in countries, and that must be dealt with. Is Trump going about it the wrong way, or is Trump just, is he just fostering fear and hatred, John? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a combination of the two. Trump is a demagogue, and he actively sets out to offend people or entire groups of people. There is a vetting process for all refugees. There always has been a vetting process, and it's quite a good one, and that's why we generally don't have terrorism in the United States. Every once in a while we'll have a lone wolf isolated case, but we don't have wide-scale terrorism here because we actually do investigate and vet would-be refugees. So I think much of this is meant just to inflame Trump's core base of support here in the United States. I do believe that Trump is anti-Muslim. I think that Trump is entirely ignorant of the role of Muslims in American society. I can tell you that the most recently departed director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, a guy who is responsible for the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands of people in this so-called war on terror, is a Muslim. And I can tell you that I served shoulder to shoulder, side by side, in places like Pakistan and Yemen and Afghanistan with CIA case officers who were Muslim. And in a couple of cases were first-generation Americans. So this nonsense about how all Muslims mean us harm, or Islam as a religion means us harm, and is antithetical to the American way of life, is embarrassing. It's ridiculous, and Trump should be ashamed of himself.
And it's dangerous. Now, the absolute final question, John. Scientists have come out today and said that we're closer by 30 seconds on the doomsday clock. We're 30 seconds close. You've seen this story today. Now, the final
I sure have.
And I know you're interested in it. The final question I have for you is, I look at Trump and it's very, very easy to be happy with his different take on Russia and his different approach to Russia and to be calmed by that. But what I don't like is he's cozying up to Israel, his very, very close friendship with Netanyahu, his long time support of the state. Because, John, I see them going after Iran, which is just another way to bait Russia and China And that's maybe where these scientists are coming from. Is that the way things are going to escalate to a point where it becomes very dangerous? Is Trump and Israel going after Iran, which hasn't done anything to anybody in centuries and is pretty benign? I'm not saying it doesn't support various groups and it doesn't meddle, it does. But is that what's going to happen? They're going to demonise Iran, ramp up the tension with Iran, and that might cause problems down the line. How do you see that?
I think that's half of it, Richie. I think the other half, and this is something that the American press has not focused on, is Trump is going to take us to the brink in our relationship with the Chinese. This nonsensical telephone call immediately after the election to the president of Taiwan was not the result of ignorance. This was very well thought out. It was planned out, and it was meant to provoke the Chinese. Trump thinks that the Chinese are going to see this as a sign of strength on behalf of the United States, and it's going to bring them to the negotiating table. That's not how the Chinese operate. And so while we're going to be mired in quicksand in the Middle East, excuse the pun, I think we're also facing very dark days with the Chinese too.
John, it was good having you back. It was great having you back on the programme. Just want to give out a couple of quick plugs, by the way. John's website is johnkiriakou.com, and his book, The Reluctant Spy, My Secret Life in the CIA's War on Terror, is a fantastic read, and you can find it at any good online retailer. And John, if there's another link you want to give our listeners, do it now, my friend, while we have the time.
Thanks. No, that's it. It's www.johnkiriakou.com. And thank you again for having me, Richie. It's always a pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of your day, my friend. Look after yourself. Thanks, John.
Thanks. All the best.
Bye for now. John Kiriakou on the line to us there from DC. Good that we got him on.